It's horse beef. Today, I'm bringing you another tier list video, and this one is going to be based around the greatest comebacks in UFC history. Pretty self-explanatory, I think. I don't think I have to get into too much more detail on that. We're going to be ranking them accordingly. I think the specific tiers are pretty self-explanatory as well. So let's get into the first one here, and that is Brock Lesnar versus Carwin. Now, he took a pretty hefty beating from Carwin in the first round, and then Carwin gassed out, and I believe Brock Lesnar secured an arm triangle. I think it was his second round. I don't think Carwin ever had more than one round of gas in him anyway. But this one, I would say, it is a great comeback considering the beating that Brock Lesnar did take in the first round. For now, I'm going to keep that one in C tier, though. And even though this is the greatest comebacks in UFC history, of course, we are going to be including Pride victories as well, because it's the same shit. A lot of the roster, the best fighters on the UFC roster at that time came from Pride anyway. But yeah, speaking of that, we got Fedor versus Kevin Randleman. Dude, he got slammed directly on his head and neck. Looked like he could have suffered some kind of a spinal cord injury. Fedor Emelianenko, being a crazy Russian man, is unfazed, reverses position, and I believe secures, a Kimura? If it's not a Kimura, correct me if I'm wrong, could have been an Americana, but it was one of those arm locks. You know what I'm saying? Pretty fantastic comeback, and the reason why it's more spectacular and ranked at A is because of the fact that he looked like he died, right? He looked like he suffered death and fought his way out of death and was unfazed. So yeah, Fedor Emelianenko, A tier at the very, very minimum here. Then we get into one that I would have to put at the very top, and that is Frankie Edgar against Gray Maynard. Any of the times that he fought Gray Maynard, I know he did lose one, and there's a draw in there, and then there's a win. I would say that the second and third fight, I believe, were the ones where he made significant comebacks. Even the one where it ended as a draw, the fact that Frankie was able to fight to a draw in the first place, considering the beatdown that he took in the opening few rounds, dude. Frankie is an animal, heart of a lion, but of course, the one where he knocks out Gray Maynard is probably the one that would be categorized more under comeback, seeing as he ended up winning the fight and one was a draw. But even the draw, like I said, still is a fucking fantastic comeback because he got the shit beat out of him and ate it all like a champ. And then we get into Frank Trigg versus Matt Hughes. I believe this was their rematch. Pretty much Frank Trigg is beating up Matt Hughes. He's in top position. I believe tries to secure a rear naked choke. Matt Hughes reverses somehow, gets up, lifts Frank Trigg over his head essentially, runs across the octagon with him, slams him, finishes him, bang boom, Bob's your uncle. Fantastic comeback. This one would probably have to be in A tier as well because the spectacle of it. You know, he fought his way out of a really, really bad position just to lift up a grown man over his head and run across the octagon with him. He just made it look cool as shit. So I'm gonna have to rank that one at A tier. You know what I'm saying? Oh, then we get one that I have to rank at the very top right away, dude. Matt Schnell and Suma Dargi. This was a weird fight, dude. Suma Dargi was seemingly rocking Matt Schnell with everything he was hitting him with. He must have put him in a rocked state, like to the point where he should have been able to finish him at least like 6 or 7 times in this fight. He couldn't miss. He was throwing nice, beautiful elbows around the guard of Matt Schnell, like, you know, reaching in, pulling down the hand of Schnell and landing the elbows around the guard. He was landing multiple of those and hurting Schnell every single time with them, dropped him on multiple occasions. And then Schnell started to put his hands together once Suma Dargi began to fade and then got top mount, just feeding him with elbows. Suma Dargi reverses position, gets on top, and then Schnell locks in a fucking beautiful triangle choke, dude. Crazy fight. Absolutely insane. One of the craziest fights I've ever seen, and for sure one of the craziest, if not the craziest, comeback of all time. This one might actually be the greatest comeback of all time when it comes down to it, but there are a few in here that will definitely be rivaling that. And we get into another one that I would probably have to rank up at the very top as well. Anderson Silva versus Chael Sonnen, just the implications of it, you know, in a 5-round championship fight. Chael Sonnen was wiping the floor with Anderson Silva, right? It made no sense. It really didn't. But it was happening. Chael was beating the shit out of Anderson Silva, even dropped him on the feet just to fucking allow Anderson to lock in a triangle choke in the dying moments of the fight, and gave up the victory, right? But of course he only tapped because he thought it was the end of the round, so ignorance on his part, but still nonetheless one of the greatest comebacks in history. Then we get into Derrick Lewis versus Alexander Volkov. Now this is a really good one, man, because Volkov was having a lot of success and Derrick Lewis was just hunting for that big right hand the entire fight, and he finally got it at the end of the fight, like pretty much in the very, very, very last moments of the fight. Rocked his shit with a big right hand, ground and pound finish. Nasty comeback in all honesty. This one, it is great. It is great. But I would say it deserves to be in C tier. This was exciting though, wasn't it? I remember watching it live in a bar. It was on the Conor McGregor Khabib card, I believe, and it did blow me away. You know what? I'm gonna put it in C tier. Like, these are all the greatest comebacks of all time, so we need to be considering like the rankings against one another. You know what I'm saying? Like, just because it's C tier doesn't mean that it's any less of a comeback, even though of course we're ranking them against each other, so it's technically lesser of a comeback, but none of these are any less than brilliant comebacks. You know what I'm saying? Like, they're all the tippy top. I feel like I don't have to explain it, but the disgruntled comments really do confuse me sometimes, and have me question the comprehension skills of the general MMA fan base. So I feel like I have to over explain sometimes. But there you go, man. Let's get into the next one here. We have Frank Mir versus Nogueira. He was getting beat up. Frank Mir, as he does, found the Kimura, broke Nogueira's arm. I would say this one is a D tier comeback just in comparison to the rest. It is fantastic. Nogueira was having a lot of success, but Frank Mir is just no one to be fucked with on the ground. Of course, neither was Nogueira either, so maybe it is even more impressive knowing that he did that to Nogueira of all people. You know, so I'm going to move that one up to C tier. Then we get into another one I have to put at the very top, man. Darren Elkins versus, I believe that was Mirsad Bektic, was getting absolutely hammered with elbows from the crucifix position. I believe in the first round, gets beat up again for the second, and then all of a sudden, man, I think Darren Elkins gets his back. He's kneeing him in the thigh, and then he throws a kick, right, a high kick as Mirsad's back is to him, lands it flush, and then I think punches him a couple more times, knocks him out cold. He's covered in blood. Starts strutting around the octagon like an absolute animal. Made Joe Rogan cry, I believe, too. Like, Joe Rogan cries about everything, doesn't he? But it was a powerful moment and one of the greatest comebacks of all time. It has to be, right? It has to be up there. Arguably the greatest, right? For me, it's either, I don't know. The Anderson Silva one is so great because it was in the last round of a championship fight. But then you also have to consider that Matt Schnell was getting the shit kicked out of him, like on death's doorstep throughout the entire fight, and same thing goes for fucking Darren Elkins. So those, for me, take the cake, and honestly, same goes for Frankie Edgar as well. It wasn't just like a sheer dominance. He was getting the shit kicked out of him in Darren Elkins' case, and you could see that on his face, and perfectly matching up with the damage tattoo on his chest, because he took all the damage in that fight. What a fight, what a comeback. Fucking banger. Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman. Now this one, I'm gonna put it at A tier, right? I understand that as far as the greatest knockouts go, that's up there 100%. But as far as the comeback goes, he was getting beat up. He was demoralized. He threw a Hail Mary shot. It landed. It put Usman out cold. And there you have it. You know, it was a cool knockout, but it's not like Leon Edwards was getting like savagely beat up and then came back. No, he was just discouraged. He's kind of acting defeated, you know, bad body language, and then just pulled out a random head kick, right? Set it up beautifully, and that's it. For me, I'm more impressed when someone is really, really getting beat up and turns the tables somehow, because that shows the perseverance of man, you know? And I feel like this one, objectively, you know what, maybe it does deserve to be at the very top. You know, it also wasn't a championship fight, so I think I do have to apply the same logic that I did with Anderson Silva and Chael Sonnen. So to be completely fair, Leon Edwards versus Kamaru Usman 2 is going to be at the very, very top. Then we get into Scott Smith versus Pete sell. Now, this one, I'm going to put that in D tier, actually. It's a fantastic comeback. In case you haven't seen it, even if you didn't watch it live, it was the Ultimate Fighter, I think season 4 finale. And Scott Smith gets rocked with a big body shot, and then pretty much goes to hold on to his midsection in pain. And as Pete Sell is coming in to finish the fight, he just gets cranked by a big right hand. And Scott Smith finishes the fight and then goes into the fetal position to recover from the body shot that had landed. It's a fantastic comeback, but it's not like he was getting beat up for the entirety of the fight. It was a very close fight, but that comeback in particular was just a comeback because he was hurt and then instantly turned the tables. Otherwise, it was a very close fight and doesn't constitute as epic of a comeback as the rest of these, you know what I'm saying? Then we get into Paul Craig versus Ankalaev. Now, I got to say, this one has to be an A tier. And the reason why it has to be an A tier is because Ankalaev, not only was he beating him up, but this is probably the biggest, I would say this is the biggest case of punching up we've ever seen in the UFC. If there's a bigger case of that, let me know, please. Because Paul Craig, knowing what we know now about Paul Craig and Ankalaev, right? Ankalaev now being a title challenger and considered the boogeyman for Alex Pereira by many. Paul Craig is just a one-dimensional submission artist. That's really all he is. And he pulled off a last-minute triangle choke / armbar victory against Ankalaev, who's no slouch as a grappler either, being Dagestani and being a Sambo, I assume master of sport, because they all seem to be masters of sport in fucking Sambo. Could be wrong, though. But yeah, one of the craziest punch-ups I've ever fucking seen, man. Paul Craig has a win over Magomed Ankalaev. Make it make sense, please. Then we get into Yair Rodriguez versus Chan Sung Jung. As far as a knockout goes, it's one of the greatest knockouts of all time. As far as a comeback goes, I don't actually like it as much as others. I'm going to put it in C tier. And the reason why it's not as great of a comeback is because, well, yes, Yair was losing the fight. He was getting beat up, and then he kept trying to get fucking Korean Zombie to engage him and embrace him with hugs and all this shit, always trying to give him high fives, and then baited him into that last moment, and Korean Zombie did a stupid thing and ran into an elbow, right? So as far as the knockout goes, 100% it's crazy, but the comeback itself, I'm not as impressed by it because it was more of just Korean Zombie being a dumbass and just trying to throw down for the fans, and Yair took advantage of the opportunity. That's the only reason why, right? And it wasn't like it was a one-sided beatdown. No, both men were having success throughout the fight. And conceivably, maybe one judge could have fucking given it to Yair by the end of it at that point. Honestly, it's not like Yair was getting absolutely demolished. But for me, it was pretty clearly Korean Zombie's fight to lose, and he lost it in the end. But then we get into Carlos Condit versus Rory McDonald. This one's pretty good too. It is pretty good, but as far as comebacks go, it's not like Rory was completely destroying him. He was definitely winning the fight, but Carlos Condit just turned the tables, won via ground and pound. It's a great comeback. It is, but I would say as far as comebacks go, it's gonna be in D tier. And then we get into another pride fight, man. Bob Sapp versus Nogueira, bro. Fucking Big Nog. This fight was wild. You just have to watch it. It's like watching a freak show, like circus act take place. Big Bob Sapp was just picking up and tossing around Big Nog at will until Big Nog finally imposed his superior jiu-jitsu and forced Bob Sapp to tap out. So just the freak show element of it, I'll put it in. No, I'm gonna put it. Yeah, but he was so much more skillful than Bob Sapp. So it was just like a David and Goliath moment, except David was far more skilled than Goliath. I'm going to put it in C tier. It's not as impressive as Fedor Emelianenko being slammed on his noggin by a beast like Kevin Randleman, although at the same time, maybe it is because Bob Sapp was such an animal at that time, but he just wasn't a good fighter. He just wasn't a good fighter. Then we get into Robbie Lawler versus Rory McDonald. This is technically a comeback because Rory McDonald was winning the fight. He was rocking Robbie Lawler on multiple occasions, putting him on wobbly legs. Man, he was fighting a beautiful fight, and the accumulative damage to the nose of Rory McDonald became too much for him, and eventually he put Rory McDonald on his ass. But as far as the comeback goes, the comeback itself, right? The fight is fantastic. Rounds 3, 4, and 5 were great, or was it round 4 that the fight was finished in. Actually, I don't actually remember. If you'd like to remind me in the comments, feel free to. But the later rounds were very exciting. Earlier rounds, maybe not as exciting as some people may think, just based on the fact that this fight is considered to be one of the greatest of all time, right? But the comeback itself, I would say C tier. C tier for that one, for me at least. Justin Gaethje versus Michael Johnson. Now, this fight wasn't too long, and Michael Johnson did have Justin Gaethje in some serious trouble, man. Wobbly legs, landing bombs on his chin. Justin Gaethje turned the tables, landing flying knees, nasty uppercuts. Like, the way he collar ties and uppercuts, it's just a thing of beauty. The way he imposed his will on Michael Johnson was beautiful, and this is one of the greatest shorter fights of all time. As far as the comeback goes, though, it is great. It is great, but I'm going to put it in C tier. Then we get into Henry Cejudo versus Marlon Moraes. And now, in hindsight, this one has to go at the very bottom. Not that it isn't a great comeback, as I've said already, but we now know that Marlon Moraes was never really a long, sustainable fighter. He has a lot of power. He's able to generate a lot of power early on. But if he's trying to finish you and he doesn't finish you, then he is guaranteed to fade, and then you can start to pick him apart a little bit, and that's what we saw there. But Henry Cejudo, man, that tie clinch from him was nasty in that fight. As soon as he found the tie clinch, started just laying those knees into Marlon Moraes, it was curtains for him. A great performance overall from Henry Cejudo, and that was to become a 2-weight class world champ, I believe, too, man. So fantastic comeback, although only good enough to be D tier on this particular tier list, man. And then we have Frank Mir versus Brock Lesnar. One, he was getting beat up, ragdolled by Brock Lesnar, ends up finding the knee bar, although it was, I think, Brock Lesnar's first fight in the UFC, was it? So maybe you can just chalk it up to him being green at that point. So I'll put that at the very bottom tier, but still a great comeback nonetheless. But then we get into another one that has to go at the top, and that is Cheick Kongo's knockout comeback over Pat Barry. Pat Barry looked like he KO'd Cheick Kongo about 4 or 5 times in the sequence. If you've ever seen the clip of Johnny Walker getting knocked out over and over again, it was essentially that happening to Cheick Kongo, except Cheick was recovering every single time. Ended up finding a beautiful right hand and a left hook, I believe, and knocked out Pat Barry cold. It's also very satisfying knowing that Pat Barry may or may not be an alleged groomer. You know, I'm not putting out accusations, but that is the word around the streets, you know what I'm saying? So it does make it a bit more satisfying to see that knockout. So that one has to be at the very top. I mean, like, that fact or not doesn't really matter. It's still one of the craziest sequences in MMA history when it gets down to it. And then we have Mirko Cro Cop versus Antonio Nogueira, stuffing the takedowns of Nogueira quite easily. I don't think Nogueira landed a single one until the faithful one that led to the eventual full mount taking of Antonio Nogueira and locking in the armbar on Cro Cop. Not a crazy comeback, so I will put it at the very bottom. It's not like Cro Cop is just putting an absolute beatdown on him. You know what I mean? He was just stuffing the takedowns, and he was able to land some ground and pound. But yeah, eventually when Nogueira did finally secure a takedown, we saw the difference between a Nogueira and a Cro Cop on the ground. And what you would expect to happen did happen. Still a great comeback nonetheless. Ronda Rousey, Jesus Christ. Fucking Holly Holm versus Miocic Tate. Now this was a pretty good one, I guess. I remember watching it, but then just like not caring 2 seconds later. It is a great comeback. She was obviously losing the fight, way outclassed on the feet and just in general, but then Miocic Tate found the back and choked Holly Holm out cold, man. It was a pretty scary looking one too. She started punching the air. Holly Holm started like fucking flapping her hands out there to try and fight the choke in some way. Did not want to tap. Great comeback, but D tier nonetheless. Tim Boesch versus Yushin Okami. Crazy comeback. He's getting beat up, like pretty much pillar to post for the entirety of the fight. And just started dogging Okami out, got him against the fence, and just started feeding him uppercuts over and over again until Okami had to go down. It was just like a last-ditch effort from Boesch, man. I wish we would see this type of tenacity from fighters nowadays. You just don't see it, man. When fighters are down on the card, they seem to get discouraged. Not Tim Boesch, man. Tim Boesch went for it, and he executed beautifully. This is one of the best comebacks of all time, probably, man. I would say this one deserves to be an A tier. Watch the fight, and you'll know what I mean. Then I have another one that I'd like to put in A tier. Is Stipe Miocic versus Daniel Cormier, number 2. he was just there to be hit. DC was peppering his face with jabs, 1-2s all night long. It was one-way traffic for the most part. Stipe was landing some good counters of his own, nice little counter uppercuts, little 1-2s every now and then. But it's when he found the left hook to the body, and it's not even like it was a multiple round breakdown of DC. No, he found the left hook in the same round that he finished him. It was just that quick of a turnaround. Really, all it took was Stipe finding the left hook to the body, and he was finding it over and over again. Landed a beautiful one, and then a beautiful 1-2 on DC. Rocks him, gets him against the fence, lands a flurry, ground and pound. It's done. Irish step dancing, man. Stipe Miocic is the man, and he's knocking out John Jones this weekend. Do not forget it. Do not forget it. It is happening. Then we get into Marlon Moraes versus Merab Dvalishvili. Now, this one is crazy. It is a crazy comeback, right? It is crazy. When you saw the state that Merab Dvalishvili was in, he looked on death's doorstep. It didn't make any sense how he was able to recover and continue to take bombs from Marlon Moraes. But then, as we've said, he ended up gassing out Marlon Moraes. But I would say that the damage that Merab was taking from Marlon was far more significant than the damage that Triple C was taking from Marlon. So I would say, just considering those two facts, the fact that Merab looked like he took an otherworldly type of beating and still came back and then ground and pound finished Marlon in the following round. I'll put that one at C tier. It is a fantastic comeback nonetheless. Then we get into Neil Magny versus Hector Lombard. Hector is cracking Neil Magny, right? At will, big bombs. Like Hector Lombard, if you didn't watch him fight, he was a bit of an asshole, a bit of a prick, but he threw bombs, right? And I forget which organization he was fighting. Was it Strike Force when he was knocking everyone's head off, man? He was on he had like 20-something knockouts in Strike Force, and had a record at the time, I swear. He was a scary guy. He was. But Neil Magny handled him, weathered the storm, and just ground and pounded him to victory. It is a great comeback, but I'll put it in D tier nonetheless. And then we get into Nate Diaz versus Conor McGregor. Another one that I'll put in D tier. Great fight, great turnaround, 100%, but expected for anyone who understood that Conor McGregor never had a great gas tank to begin with, and Nate Diaz did, and the chin to go along with it, and the superior grappling. And this, I guess, was always going to happen. You know, I guess Nate Diaz was kind of counted out by a lot of people, but real ones like myself, no. I knew Nate was going to win that one with relative ease after weathering the storm. He did it, although it wasn't, yes, it's a great comeback, but at the same time, in a 5-round fight against Nate Diaz and your name is Conor McGregor, that's obviously going to happen to you, despite the fact that Conor McGregor did improve upon his approach in the rematch. There's still an argument that Nate Diaz won that fight too, but let's just move on here, man. Travis Browne versus the Reem, man. Alistair Overeem, he was beating him up, and then Travis Browne finds the front kick to the body, starts spamming little front kicks, and then lands one on the chin, drops Overeem, takes him out. It is a great comeback. It really is, man. Overeem at the time looked like a terrifying force. I think it was either this knockout or the Antonio Silva knockout that led to Overeem going on a bit of a skid. At that time, I don't know if it was this fight or that one, but I'll put this one in. I'll put it in D tier. Yeah, I'll put it in D tier. And now that I'm looking at it, man, dude, Derrick Lewis's balls was hot. We're going to put him in A tier. And then we get into the very last one on the tier list, and that is Alex Pereira versus Israel Adesanya. And this is their first fight in the UFC. It's a great comeback. It wasn't one-way traffic, but Izzy did steal the first round, probably lost the second, and probably took the third and fourth. And for Alex Pereira to turn up the heat the way he did in the 5th round, was like his 3rd or 4th fight in the UFC, and to do what he did to Izzy in that 5th round to win the title, dude, what a fantastic turnaround. It really was. I don't know if I would say that it's worthy of being an A tier. I'm thinking maybe this is more of a C tier type one, because it's not like Alex Pereira was getting beat up real bad. It was a very technical kickboxing match in which he was behind on. There was some grappling laced in between the kickboxing exchanges, but for the most part, it was a well-contested kickboxing match. Neither guy really hurt each other too severely throughout the fight up until the finishing sequence and the end of the first round for Izzy. So I'll put that one in C tier. It's not D, it is C, mostly just because of the fact that Alex Pereira won the belt off of that, and he was so new to the UFC, right? I guess that doesn't really factor in. That shouldn't factor into comebacks, but fuck it, man. I have my own criteria that I make up on the spot, and you have to accept it because fuck you is why, right? But that does conclude the tier list, everybody. If you enjoyed it, if you didn't enjoy it, let me know in the comment section below. Any other future video ideas that you have for me that you'd like to see me cover, let me know in the comment section below. And as always, I appreciate you watching, and I'll see you on the next one, baby.